Our story begins in 1832, when a Dutch immigrant named Peter Rogers built a paper mill on Hartford Road in Manchester, across the street from the Cheney silk mills. The Rogers Paper Company, as it was called, made paperboard for the booming textile industry of New England. Peter died suddenly in 1841, and the paper company was taken over by his ambitious son, Henry. When Henry invented a technique for the extraction of newsprint from newspaper, his influence and his business spread rapidly throughout the Northeast, and the Rogers Paper Manufacturing Company became very successful. Henry had two children. Gertrude was born in 1866 and Knight in 1870. When Henry retired in 1890, his children took control of the family business. Knight, being Henry's only son, was expected to exert the main force in running the business. But in a short time, it became clear to everyone that Gertrude had more business sense than he had, and so she became, in effect if not title, the leader of the family business. The fortunes of the Rogers family took a downturn in the early 20th century. A local newspaper article in 1906 described how Henry took to his bed after visiting the paper company one morning and died 2 days later, probably from pneumonia. At about the same time, Knight became chronically ill, probably with tuberculosis, and became a family problem. He reportedly argued with Gertrude all the time, to the point that he was forced to physically move his house across the street and off the family property. At the time of Knight's death, Gertrude was already the informal leader of the paper company. After his death, Gertrude formally took control and continued transforming it from a company that provided paper products for the candle and lighting oil industries to one that provided insulator paper to the rapidly growing electricity industry. After managing the paper company through World War I, she hired non-family business executives in the early 20s to take over the day-to-day operations of the factory, and eventually sold them all her shares in 1927 as the Great Depression was looming. In the meantime, the world was hit with the flu pandemic in the winter of 1918, killing as many as 100 million people worldwide. Largely in response to that pandemic, and as a memorial to the fallen soldiers of World War I, Manchester Memorial Hospital was built in 1920. The original hospital, constructed on the crest of a hill, had 50 beds and cost $150,000 to build. In the Manchester of 1932, Gertrude became a member of the Central Connecticut social elite. She loved to travel, to the western United States, to Europe, and to Mexico. It was when she returned from one of these trips, quite sick with an undiagnosed illness, that the second character in our story comes into view. Howard Boyd grew up in rural Pennsylvania, the only boy in a family that was quite different from the Rogers family. Where the Rogers family never spared for money, the Boyd family had very little. But what the Boyd children may have lacked in financial status, Howard and his three sisters made up for through old-fashioned hard work. Howard put himself through Allegheny College by working in the local rail yard, after which he applied and was accepted to Harvard Medical School in Boston. In between semesters of medical school, Howard worked in a local private high school as a member of its teaching staff. He was known for his intellect, self-discipline, and ambition. During his last year in medical school, he met and fell in love with a young nurse named Janet. Shortly after graduating Harvard Medical School in 1921, they were married in Massachusetts, and then moved to Hartford for his internship at Hartford Hospital. At the conclusion of his internship, Howard moved his young family to Manchester and started his career as a general practitioner. As a member of the growing Manchester medical staff of 11, Howard became a well-known and much-loved community physician. One of Howard's patients as a general practitioner was Gertrude Rogers. When she returned from Mexico with the unexplained condition, he admitted her to Manchester Memorial Hospital for evaluation. Manchester Hospital's laboratory at that time was a fledgling department doing rudimentary diagnostic assessments. It wouldn't hire a pathologist for another 18 years. and the laboratory staff was not able to shed much light on Gertrude's illness as Howard struggled to manage her condition. So he sent one of Gertrude's specimens to Hartford Hospital and consulted with one of his mentors there. The Hartford Hospital laboratory staff identified an uncommon parasite, and Gertrude was managed with the treatment of the day, after which she gradually recovered. In future conversations, Howard explained to Gertrude that if she wanted her community hospital to be as well equipped as Hartford Hospital was, and its laboratory to be as diagnostically proficient as Hartford's was, she should do something about it, for the benefit of herself and for the benefit of future patients. So in a codicil to her last will and testament, written and executed in 1941, Gertrude wrote the following: "I direct that the net income from this fund be used and applied for the development and support of research and laboratory work by the Medical and Pathological Service." With those words, Gertrude Rogers established a legacy that would provide innumerable benefits for Manchester Memorial Hospital and the community. The fund was about $100,000 at that time and was invested in stocks in a portfolio administered by Connecticut Bank and Trust. Howard would be one of the first trustees. Gertrude died shortly thereafter in 1943. Her obituary was a single paragraph in the Hartford Courant, and she left no heirs. Howard would die in 1961 after practicing in Manchester for almost 40 years and as chief of pediatrics for almost 20 years. Starting in the 60s, with requests to the Rogers Fund granted by the trustees, the Manchester Hospital Laboratory began to grow, both in testing sophistication and in the expertise of its staff. In 1967, the laboratory performed 16,000 tests. In 2010, the full-service clinical laboratory performed approximately 1.8 million tests. During the 70s, the laboratory ran a medical technologist training program that was in part supported by the Rogers Fund. In 1971, the laboratory purchased a radioisotope instrument to perform thyroid nuclear scans, examinations that are routine today but were quite sophisticated for that time. In this article, C. Elmore Watkins, President Emeritus of the Manchester Memorial Hospital Board of Trustees, was quoted as saying, "The way she set up her will was a compliment to her astuteness as a businesswoman, for which we in Manchester should be forever grateful." Today, thanks to the Rogers Fund, the laboratory is blessed with robotic technology that processes more tests with a wider menu in less time and with higher accuracy than it did just 5 years ago. During the last 50 years, the Rogers Fund has dispersed approximately $2.5 million, supporting the performance of at least 35 million tests. In addition, in the area of clinical research, the fund has supported approximately 100 clinical trials, many of which form the infrastructure of our cancer program, and approximately 400 tumor boards, the clinical conferences during which our doctors, nurses, and allied health professionals formulate multidisciplinary treatment plans for our cancer patients. Who we are today as physicians, laboratory scientists, and researchers is in no small part due to the beneficence of the Rogers Fund. As Dr. Boyd was fond of saying, if you have the chance to do something good for people, then that's what you should do. Legacy gifts, like the one established by Gertrude Rogers, can be set up by anyone interested in ensuring the ongoing growth and success of our community healthcare network. For more information on how to make a legacy gift, contact the ECHN Community Healthcare Foundation.